What's the fastest way for somebody to go from skinny to muscular?
I've been building muscle for a very long time, and so I wasn't really, really skinny. But the goal was, could I put on 25 pounds of muscle from where I was? And just for the audience, for some context, so they understand the reality of this, because people are going to hear the numbers that I did, and they're going to think, they're going to try and call it real. But just the power of muscle memory. In my peak bodybuilding years, I had 50 more pounds of muscle than I'm currently carrying on my body right now. And I did that for years. And so my body was used to being 240 pounds and 205 of that being all muscle for a long time. And then I stopped competing almost 7 years ago, I think now. And over time, slowly lost 5 pounds, 10 pounds, 15 pounds, 20 pounds, about 25 pounds of muscle. Still was a very muscular guy. That means I still had 175, 180 pounds of muscle on my body. And then just this last year, you know this because I know you pay attention to the show, I went on Ozempic, not because I needed to, but because it's been exploding. And one of the things I love about my partners and I is we love to not only understand the science behind a lot of this stuff so we can communicate with the players, we like to experience it. So not only can we talk from a medical point, like what's going on, or chemical, what's happening scientifically, and then also be able to, from experience, go man, this is what it felt like, or this is how my clients have experienced things. So I decided to go on this Ozempic journey of let's see what this feels like. That was wild, and the story in itself. And I lost a ton of weight. Why did it? Problem is, I also lost a lot of muscle. I lost another 20 pounds of muscle through that journey, and knowing that I could get it all back. And so I just recently came off of, okay, I'm done with Ozempic. I've now lost all this muscle over the course of, years. Let's document the process of me building it back. So and it's important I paint that picture so people understand that I ended up putting on 22 pounds of muscle, and I dropped down to 10% body fat. I think I started at 16. This is all documented, by the way, so people that want to fact check and go back and look at all. I tracked it. I did body fat testing from a place, body spec, and I tracked daily all my stuff. So anyways, ended up putting on about 22 pounds of muscle, dropped from 16 point something% body fat down to 10% body fat. Great transformation. But the point of me bringing this up was that was the goal, right? Was to, can I put on as much muscle as possible as fast as I possibly can? Now, the most important part, and I think the mistake that a lot of people make, is very similar to the same mistake that people who are trying to lose the most amount of weight in the shortest period of time make also. Or I should say the most amount of fat, because losing weight and losing fat are two different things, is they apply too much too fast, and they think the more they do, the more results they're going to get. And I understand why this is so confusing or frustrating, because damn near everything else in our life rewards us for that attitude or that application, right? You study harder and more, you're probably going to learn more and be smarter. You work harder at work, you're probably going to get the promotions and move up the ladder faster, right? You practice your sport more and harder, you're probably going to get better at your sport. You work and do your craft way more. So almost everything else that we do in life serves us to be obsessive and work harder at it. Unfortunately, exercise science doesn't work that way. So when it comes to body composition change and building muscle or burning body fat, it does not work that way. It is not the harder you go, the more intensity, the more you apply, the more results you get. And so I think the same exact mistake that people make on their fat loss journey, they make on their muscle building journey. And by the way, not only is this speaking from, the science, it's also speaking from firsthand experience as a young, 20-year-old boy who was the skinny kid who was insecure about how skinny he was teased and picked on when he was little, being, bird boy and being called anorexic and, all the names I've been called for the way. I mean, you could see when I was 20 years old and if I lifted my arms up, you could see my rib cage. That's how skinny I was. And so I was, obsessed with trying to build muscle, coming from a place of insecurity, and thought this, and this is what I did. Trained 7 days a week. I've done double days, trained all the different training programs, tried every supplement, did all the steroids too. I tried it all. Like, I mean, in pursuit of building as much muscle as I possibly can. I mean, you do all those things I just said, and you'll see some muscle gain, but not as much as I wanted or thought I should have for the amount of effort and work I was putting in. It wasn't until I became way more experienced, way more educated on the exercise science, human physiology, nutrition, which came much later in my career. And then it all came together for me, and I realized, oh no, this is not like anything else I've done. There is definitely a right way and a wrong way to do it. And I think the part that's also challenging is you can be doing things the wrong way and still see some results. And so there's this bit of feedback that you get thinking that you're doing the right thing, but you're not. And so that's mistake one in the pursuit of building as much muscle as possible. I have a saying that I say on our podcast all the time that applies to this, which is the goal is to do as little as possible to elicit the most amount of change. And what that means is I want to apply the least amount of stimulus, change, activity, work in order to reap the most amount of benefits. And there's definitely too little and there's definitely too much. And so it's trying to find that sweet spot of perfect adaptation. And so, and I love my partner and co-host Sal gives this great analogy for how the body adapts with how our skin adapts to the sun, right? To getting tan. And it's a good visual for most people because most people have experienced a little bit of a sunburn when they laid out in the sun too much. And he's like, you think that if your goal is to get tan, you go lay out in the sun. Well, that is the way to do it, but it's the longer and harder you do it for doesn't necessarily get you more tan. What happens, right? If you sit out there for 4 hours in the peak sun and you haven't had any sun whatsoever, you end up getting sunburnt. And maybe you get a little bit of color, but you end up peeling and turning more red than you actually tan your skin. Versus that same person who decided for the next 14 days, they would start day one, 10 minutes out in the sun, then 30 minutes out in the sun, and then an hour in the sun, and then maybe eventually they could work up to the 4 hours and be fine. But what you do is you're doing as little as possible to elicit that change. You're getting enough exposure so your body starts to adapt. And what we don't want to do is do so much exposure that the body gets this loud signal of recovery versus an adaptation, because those are two different signals. We even though they are connected and they work together, but your body, if it gets too much damage, either from the sun or exercise, because both of those the body receives as a stress, if you do too much of it, then the body prioritizes recovery over adaptation. And it's just, and which is what people get caught in what we like to call the recovery trap, which is they're just constantly doing damage and stress to the body, and they're never giving the body a chance to truly adapt. It's always in trying to recover because you're constantly attacking it. That's what happens with exercise. And that's what happens when the young man or even girl who is trying to build muscle and is highly motivated makes that mistake. They go in thinking that more intensity, more days, more time is going to give me more results. And that's the same mindset if you were to go out and be like, I'm going to lay out in the sun in Mexico or somewhere for as long as I possibly can to get tan. And I think most people hear that and go like, well, that would be a terrible idea because they know what would happen to them. Well, guess what? That's no different with exercise science. You can't just do tons of, and just like the tanning analogy, you'll get a little bit of color from that, after the blisters wear off, if you can, but not a lot. And so if you go train really, really hard, like crazy, lifting weights and eat more calories, you'll build a little bit of muscle. But what will end up happening is the body will receive that loud stress signal as it being constantly attacked. And so recovery becomes the priority versus adaptation. And we want adaptation. We want the body to receive that signal of stress and go, oh, we need to be prepared for the next time he decides to stress me this way. Let's get stronger. Let's build a little bit of muscle. But if that signal is too loud, then it's constantly more defending itself, going, oh God, that was too much. Recover, we're hurt, we're damaged. So I would say that's the number one mistake when first doing it. So understanding that is key, is that if I'm coming, and that looks different, there's a big spectrum there based off the individual. So if you're someone who's listening to this, and which is probably a lot of people who kind of fell off Halloween time and then Thanksgiving time and then Christmas time, and so this time of the year represents them getting back into training or back into shape, or maybe the first time ever because they're motivated because of New Year's, the amount that person needs, because they haven't been doing anything really exercise and diet wise for the last few months, is very little that they need to do. They just need to turn that knob a tiny bit. And so it starts off with finding out that, right? And figuring that out, like, where am I coming from? Now, how do I start to apply exercise? And so just like I would with a client who is trying to lose a bunch of weight that's coming off from the holidays, I'm doing the same thing with the guy or the girl that's trying to build muscle. And so first prescription is, let's just track. Let's just kind of find out your basis. I like 2 weeks. I can work with a week, but I like to tell clients, like, just give me a snapshot of what you're eating every day and your movement. Those two are the big key factors for me. And so in those 2 weeks, I actually want them to continue on the similar behaviors they were doing just, say, 3-4 weeks ago. I don't want them to go, oh, my trainer is tracking what I'm doing. Let's make good food choices. Let's get to the gym twice a day. And they do it. Like, no, that's not the idea. The idea is we get a really good idea of your baseline and what you've probably been doing for the last 30, 60, 90 or more days consistently, so that I know how to apply that intensity that I'm talking about and what knobs to turn just a little bit, just that little bit of change that we need to do to elicit, or that little bit of training change or nutrition change to elicit that adaptation that we want. So that looks like that. And so I love your basic step counters. So any Fitbit, Apple Watch, Whoop, whatever you use, but to get some sort of tracking on your activity. How often are you, and a lot of those tools also monitor sleep, which is a great thing for us to kind of peer into while we're doing all this tracking. So I just want that. I want to see where your activity level is. And then I want to see nutritionally what you're eating. Again, not trying to impress me as your trainer. You just eat like you normally would, which means if you have a hard time getting up and having breakfast and you skip it, I want you to skip it right now. If you eat ice cream at the end of the night, every night, I want you to do it. And it's literally just to really get an idea where we're at. And then from there, I'm going to make these small tweaks. Now, most common things for the person trying to build muscle that struggles with that, almost always, in fact, 99.9% of the time, that person is under eating protein for optimal protein. Maybe not what they need to live and survive, but under eating what is optimal for building muscle, especially for somebody who's about to start a strength training program. So normally I just start right there after I assess. So since 99.9, I can pretty much tell everybody this is kind of the first tip, which is, okay, however much you want to weigh. So if you're skinny trying to build muscle, or just trying to build muscle, what does that look like? And we'll use my body round numbers to be, let's say I'm 200 pounds and I want to be 220 pounds of lean muscle. So I'm going to eat 220 grams of protein. We can get into, what the science says in the books on 0.6 to 0.8 per lean body mass. That's what the science says. What that number comes out to for the average person, that's really easy, that kind of covers all your bases, is 1-to-1 ratio. Whatever you want to weigh on the scale, eat that in grams of protein. That puts you in that optimal space. So instead of trying to get into arguments on, I heard so-and-so say this, like, that's over decades of training clients, we have found that this is just an easy, good number for people, that they have to break their calculator out and figure out their lean tissue every 3 weeks and how that's changing, and then multiply it by 0.6 or 0.8, 1-to-1. So go hit your protein intake, and then let's start a training routine. And normally when it comes to lifting, again, here's the mistake. I always want a client to commit to something that they know they can do forever, and not do what they're willing to do right now. And when you're in this state of motivation, and you're excited to get going, and it's the New Year's resolution, you overdo it by going like, well, I could get in the gym pretty much every day at this time, or 5 days a week easily during the week, and I'll just take weekends off. So I'm going to go Monday through Friday at 8 a.m. That's my time to go to the gym, and they go to the gym every single day. That's not my suggestion. My suggestion is starting somewhere between 1 and 3 days. That's it. Again, if you weren't doing anything before, that's like, so this is like me giving you the advice of, if you have all this, let's just get out in the sun, 3 days a week for 20 minutes. That's it. That's going to be enough to already start to tan that skin. You getting in the gym 1 to 3 days a week for 30 minutes to 60 minutes of strength training is enough to already send a signal to the body, we need more muscle than you currently have right now, because you weren't doing that before. Now you are starting to, and that alone, paired with hitting your protein intake consistently, will already start building those first few pounds of muscle. Guaranteed. Guaranteed if you do that. Where you might go wrong is by doing more than you think you need to do and overreaching on the training. And that is how you go to a hard plateau, is, again, if you fall into that recovery trap that I was talking about. Or you make the common mistake, which is not only do you over apply the amount of training you're doing, you also you have a hard time consistently hitting your protein intake. So the combination of the two of those is a recipe for no results for a long period of time, yet feeling like you deserve them because you're working so hard in the gym and you're making sacrifices nutritionally, yet no results are happening. So that's how I start that person.